Alright, welcome back to the channel, guys. Hot topic today. We are going to be talking about LS swaps and some of the costs that are affiliated with doing an LS swap. I still get a ton of questions, and I see a ton of questions out on social media platforms about what it takes, and the biggest one really is just cost. So what I've done in this video, real quick, I'm going to try and condense this as much as possible, yet still give good information. I've basically condensed this in like 5 different categories, and then some food for thought at the end. So basically, nobody can answer that question for you as to how much an LS swap costs, because it ranges from very cheap to very expensive and everywhere in between. So first thing you need to ask yourself, get a pen and paper, write this stuff down. What engine do you want? When you say LS swap, that's extremely broad. 4.8, 5.3, 6 liter, there's LS 1, 2, and 3, all the way up to 7. There's like a whole different range of LS based engines that you can choose from, and the cost can go from hundreds of dollars to thousands of dollars just to get your engine. The second thing is going to be, what transmission are you going to run behind it? Are you looking for an engine transmission combo, or are you going to be bolting this LS to an existing transmission that was previously bolted to a small block Chevy, because the bell housings are compatible from an LS from a small block, minus 1 bolt hole, I believe. At least that's the way mine was. Mine's a 5.3 bolted to a turbo 400. The third factor to look at is going to be, what kind of fuel injection and fuel system are you going to need? I've got a 91 Z28 Camaro that I did the LS swap on. I also have an 85 GMC High Sierra. My 91 Camaro was a factory fuel injected car, therefore it came with an intake pump and all the plumbing and everything, so it was very simple to adapt to the fuel injection of a 5.3. Now, I put a Holley Sniper on mine, but it's one and the same. You need 60 some PSI fuel pressure to run fuel injection, give or take a few. The truck I have sitting out back is carbureted. It needs 7 PSI of fuel pressure, therefore it runs off essentially a lift pump. An engine driven lift pump draws fuel from the tank, delivers it to the carburetor. That's all it needs. The car was about $120 fuel pump upgrade for performance for my Holley Sniper, and it was good to go. The truck is going to take an entire fuel system to switch over to fuel injection. Or are you going to go carbureted? If you do a carbureted LS combination, which is kind of what mine is, but not really, it is very similar. You have to look at intake, adaptation to your carburetor, and again, fuel system, which either or. If you have fuel injection at that pump, you actually need to lower your fuel pressure, put in a regulator back to your return to drop that fuel pressure down. Injection, obviously you need to bump it up. Many factors there. So when you're writing this stuff down, you can kind of go from one to the next and build your costs from there, your parts list as to what you're going to need for your platform. The rest of it's actually kind of smaller stuff, things to think about. Power steering, what are you going to have to do? Your electrical system, there is some things that need done with the carburetor that would come on an LS engine, like a junkyard engine. You may have to do some different wiring to make it work with your vehicle. You have your exhaust. That can be a big one and can get expensive, because depending on your application, there may not be kits, there may not be headers, swap headers. Some of that stuff you may have to build. My car, actually, there is no kits out there for exhaust to get it out the back of the car. The Speed Engineering did make some LS swap headers, so that was super handy. Paid the money, parts bolted right on, they worked. You've got your cooling system that's going to have to be adapted over, and so much more. Are you running the LS computer? Say you get a junkyard engine that has the computer system and wiring on it. Are you going to run that computer system? Therefore, how are you going to adapt that to make your gauges work if that's what you desire in your vehicle? If you want like check engine lights and all that stuff to go with it. Likewise with transmission, are you going to be using an electronically controlled transmission that will also need a computer? Chances are, if you're doing an LS swap, your vehicle doesn't have any of that. So to keep your gauges working and all that, and having the computer control engine, transmission, and communicate with the entire vehicle. There's so many different avenues you can take there to make all that work. So that's really it as far as like the major stuff. To answer it simply, if you have a GM based vehicle that has a small block in it right now, getting an LS engine in it, bolted down, connected, is actually fairly cheap and simple. You have the little things you may need to buy to adapt to whatever transmission you're running. In my case, it was adjusting some holes in a flex plate and getting an adapter pilot bushing for the snout of my torque converter to mate with the crank of the 5.3. $120 set of engine motor mounts, some adapter mounts that bolt to the LS that can sit on factory style clamshell mounts. That was my case. That's really all it took to get the engine in the car. Now, in comparison to my 85 GMC motor mounts, it's got a turbo 350 or a TH 350 transmission, so it's probably going to be about the same. The fuel system is not going to be as simple. And actually, to go down that rabbit hole, and a whole other point I want to make in this video, another like really important thing you need to ask yourself is how much horsepower are you wanting to run? Like, what is your end goal with your vehicle? If your answer is 500 horsepower or less, and that's just me picking a number in the ballpark, if it's 500 horsepower or less, you really need to ask yourself why you are taking out the engine that's in it and putting in an LS. Because if the engine you are taking out is a small block 350 or something in that range, maybe even a 400, 383, I don't know. If that's what you're taking out, you really need to ask yourself why. Especially if your end goal for power is somewhere in the neighborhood of 500. It is in my unprofessional opinion that the only reason why you should throw something like that in the garbage to put in an LS is because you are wanting boosted applications or power adders and want to get in the 600, 700, 800 plus horsepower range. Now, I like a small block Chevy, a good, 010 block, 4-bolt main. Depending on who you ask and if it's set up right, 500-600 horsepower is going to be about the limit on it, depending on what you do, of course. A stock bottom end LS platform have been known to get into the thousands. I can't speak of reliability at those numbers for either platform. Point is, both engines and setups are going to have their limits. So the main factor when people start talking about LS swaps really isn't what it takes to get the engine in the car, it's how much money you want to throw at the engine. In the research that I've done, even just flipping through one of these catalogs, taking an LS next to a small block Chevy, the 350, pretty much any era, like your 5.3 for example, you're going to be bolting in about 300 horsepower. However you put fuel to it, you're going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 horsepower. It's going to breathe 300-ish horsepower. Now your small block can be anywhere from 200 to mid 200s, a lot less. The heads aren't going to flow as good. But if you get in your parts supplier of choice, I'm a big fan of Summit, also use Jag, and you start researching costs of parts, I think you can take either one of those platform in stock condition out of whatever vehicle they were in and dollar for dollar hit the same horsepower mark up to a certain amount, which would be somewhere in the 400, 450 horsepower range. My swap was cheap until I put money in the engine. But I don't know if that really counts or if that's what you're asking when it comes to cost. If you want bone stock LS power, 300 horsepower is good for you. Leave it alone. Leave the truck intake on it, use the factory computer, plug in the wires you need, and call it good. Have your LS swap. I don't know what, if it's your goal to just say like, yep, I did an LS swap, or to tell people it has an LS swap. The main reason that I believe it is worth doing an LS swap is for that additional power reliability. Other than that, in hindsight, my car had a good running small block Chevy 350 in it. It was a full roller motor. It actually ran really good. It was kind of silly to take that motor out, except it had a bad thrust bearing in it, and the crank was actually doing some damage to the block. It needed replaced. So at that point, I knew that down the road, and I currently am, going to a boosted application, going to be 600-700 horsepower, or maybe even north of that eventually. To me, that warranted the work of doing an LS swap. My 85 GMC has got a perfectly good running small block Chevy 350 in it. I thought about doing something LS swap based with it, but the end goal for that truck, me writing down my goals, is I would like to have reliable 400 horsepower. There's absolutely no reason to throw away that small block Chevy that's in it for an LS, because dollar for dollar, it's actually going to go backwards. Like by the time I buy all the LS swap parts again to swap it into that truck, and I'm talking like even just the fittings, like every little bit and piece, the $5 stuff, the $10 stuff, $20 stuff, it adds up in the swap parts. Now the engine that's in that truck, everything works. I'm guessing it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 220 horsepower the way it sits, and I want closer to 350, 400. You flip through this catalog, for $1,800 you can get a full top end kit, which is cam, lifters, rods, rockers, heads, intake, still be carbureted, and it's advertised at 400 horsepower right there. That's for under $2,000. I have that much money in the injection in my car upstairs, and it's pushing about 400 horsepower, and that's for the Holley Sniper, for the MSD box to run the ignition, the intake to accept the Sniper to the LS, and then some. So, again, dollar for dollar, when you're down in those lower horsepower ranges, the LSs aren't there. I mean, sure, you get the reliability. If you run the factory fuel injection, that's good stuff, but then you're dealing with computers. The factory computer, unless you've got good money software, you can't touch it. My Holley Sniper, I can plug my computer into it. I can change anything and everything. The MSD box, I can plug my computer into it. I can change timing tables, set up two-step, launch retards, all that. I can, so to me, that was worth the money to do that, to get away from that factory computer. But I think you can kind of get where I'm going with this, to ask the question, how much did it cost to LS swap your car? Nobody can answer that. Even if I was a running shop and you brought your car to me and said, hey, I want an LS, put in, what would you charge me? We're going to have to sit for a while and really figure out piece by piece what it is that you're wanting. And then it's going to take a lot of time to do the step-by-step research into what all that's going to cost, plus labor. You're putting something in there that wasn't, I shouldn't say it wasn't designed to be in there, but it wasn't originally designed to be in there, and things change. I remember in my swap, the bolting stuff in was easy, and then they make LS swap parts, so you start buying the correct parts that were made for your car. Well, now you got brake lines that are an inch off your driver's side header, and your steering shaft is getting low on clearance, and now your oil pan that came on the engine you bought doesn't fit your car, and you buy the wrong one, or something doesn't work. Well, a prime example, in my car, I bought an LS swap, a universal LS swap oil pan for it. Everything worked great until I upgraded to an aftermarket K member and put that in. It orientated the engine just slightly differently, and all of a sudden my idler arm, pitman arm in my car started to not clear the oil pan anymore. So I had to buy a different oil pan for it. And it's like things like this that just accumulate to, really expensive. And at the end of the day, when you look at it, it's a 400 horsepower car, and that's just based on the times that it's running. It's a 3,400 pound car running mid-12s. So I figured we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 horsepower. The amount of money that I got into it, I could have thrown in a small block Chevy and probably had more power, to be honest with you. Again, the LS swap deal is like so blown up on the internet, and because that's what you see from a lot of these big names and big YouTubers out there that are running LS swapped cars and LS platformed cars. Well, one of the things that if you look, every one of them guys has in common is they're all over 1,000 horsepower and they're running 8s and faster. You know what I mean? So if you're kind of down in my world and like 500 horsepower is still cool, it's really, you know, we kind of have the advantage down here at those horsepower numbers because an LS will get you there, a small block Chevy will get you there, you know, 383 strokers, 400s. Even, you know, there's just so many more options and different things we can do and keep our vehicles somewhat era correct, you know. It's going to get to the point where it's going to be kind of rare to pop a hood on an old car sitting in someone's field and not find an LS sitting in it, you know, and which isn't a bad thing, but at the same time, like, we're kind of killing the originality of the era. And there's plenty of guys out there that made a lot more horsepower than I'm going to with my car, and LSs weren't even around then. So all things to think about, you know, to each their own. You do you with your car and your build. I like fully support everyone in like making their own, you know, doing whatever you want to. You know, your vehicle is your own. You know, I try and make my vehicles different, you know, put my touch on them, and I support anyone else that does that, you know. Like, I'm all about that. So anyways, really difficult question to answer. This is like the best that I can come up with. I will open up the comments down below if you have specific questions that are more dialed in. I would love to answer your questions. Just leave me a comment down below. Again, I've got a 91 Z28 Camaro that I've got a 5.3 in hooked to a turbo 400. Did the full swap, you know, Holly Sniper, MSD controller, ditched all the factory wiring, not running factory computer stuff, you know. And go back and look at my videos. I did a ton of how-tos of my whole build process for that. And my platform is not a whole lot different than a lot of other GM-based vehicles of the same era. You know, if it had a small block Chevy bolted to it, LS swaps are easy and cheap. Making them run, making them fast is where it gets really expensive. So anyways, guys, that's going to be it. Tried to keep this quick. Don't know if I did a good job or not, but yeah, comment down below. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Stay good.